Hey, welcome to Hank's True Barbecue. Today we're going to talk about fire management in an offset smoker. It's going to get real practical. We're going to do a few measurements, so stick around. Now let's start with talking about which wood to use. Barbecue is often or almost always regional. That means you use wood that's available regionally to you. Typically in Texas that's oak, post oak and white oak because it's available plenty. Also here, that's what I'm using, oak, because I'm in a very large population of oak trees. We have some logs here, and this is what I call splits. Now, a hardwood like oak is really good. Any type of hardwood will do. They offer different flavor profiles, which of course is highly relevant. I like oak because it contains vanillin, so it's really nice, great flavor. But many other types of hardwood will do. The types of wood you want to avoid is the ones that contain sap, so steer very clear of them. We have plenty of birch wood here, but I like that for direct grilling, direct high heat, but I'm not fond at all of the flavor profile, so I never use it for smoking. Beechwood is very common for fish, but oak's the way to go. This is what I use almost all the time in my smoker, so that's what we're going to use now. So when burning wood you add flavor, and how does that work actually? Because, well, what it means is we don't have complete combustion of the wood. It's not perfect, because if it was perfect it wouldn't taste anything. So, and that's a benefit of using different types of wood with a really clean burn, but at the same time not complete. Now when burning wood it goes through 3 different stages, which you can actually read about in my book, Barbecue, Fire and Smoke. Except for that, like the first phase is just evaporating water, the second is burning the organic compounds, volatile organic compounds. That's what adds flavor. And the final stage, when it's hot enough, is when you actually start burning the wood fibers or the cellulose. And that's what we're taking advantage of in an offset smoker. So speaking about a clean burn, when should you use logs, when should you use splits, etc.? Well, that all depends on the size of the smoker, the size of the fire you're building, and what temps you're trying to maintain. Now, even a relatively large smoker like this one, I don't need to use full logs. It's actually going to hinder the clean burn in the fire. I'm actually going to show you visually when we get this thing started up, so you can see, and we're also going to look at the smokestack to see the color of the smoke that's coming out. But typically when running this one, even though it's filled with briskets, I can run it on like 5 of these, roughly 5 or 6, and maintain a steady tempo of 260, 275, which I think is really good. So it's nice and efficient. And the thing is, you have such a high energy in wood, which means you don't need to use a lot. I think that's one of the biggest like aha moments for a lot of people when they're starting out running a pit like an offset smoker, is that there's plenty of energy in here, so you don't need to use much. But we're going to get the fire started soon. We're going to use splits, we're going to try out a log, and I'll show you the difference. So looking into the firebox and getting that fire started, like just a few words about what I call the grill grates. Now this looks kind of shabby, to be honest. Every time I've used it for 10 hours I just flip it around and step on it to flatten it out a bit. But there's a real benefit to using these grates, because the holes are rather small, and that means the glowing embers stay on the grates longer, and actually means I get a longer, like more fuel efficiency, because I get more heat from each split before it falls through, and then I can wipe up the ash. So looks a bit crappy, but it works exceptionally well. I mean, I have like 20 by 20 millimeter solid steel bars also. I could weld that up, but I would still put some grates on, because again, it keeps the glowing embers on top of the grates for longer, and that means more efficiency. Except for that, starting a fire, you can do it like any which way. If you want to use a propane torch, that works. Some people start with charcoal first and then put the splits on. To me, it just seems like an unnecessary intermediate step. I just cut the splits into kindling like that, and pile them up here and throw in a match, and I'll have a fire going within 10 minutes. It's really fast and quick, so that's what we're going to do now too. No point in using charcoal or anything else, but I guess that gas torch or propane torch is really helpful. I just pile it up like that, forming a little square if you like. As you can see, I'm using quite thin splits. That's good. Like that, and I build it like so it leans in, so to speak, so it gets closer and closer, and then I drop a match in here, and then that sets everything on fire, and then I can add splits once it's up and running. So really easy. Well, we are getting up to temps. I thought there are a few things to mention about how to feed the flame, really. What I do always is I keep a good stack of wood like that around. I always place like 10 or 15 splits up here, because they're going to get pre-warmed before putting them into the fire. In the summer it doesn't matter that much, but in the winter time it's really, really convenient. Also, I use what I call a two-phase system. So if I have thicker splits or logs, I grab them and place them right here and tuck them away in the corners. Because this is like the seconds level. I usually can get 4 or 5 in there like that. This really helps preheating the logs so that I can keep a more consistent temp. So instead of dropping in a big log like that, it's gonna get my temps to fluctuate. By preheating them like this, it's gonna save a lot of time and gonna make your whole smoke session go a lot smoother. So preheat up here, then move in here, and then keep feeding the flame. So this is a real good strategy. I'm not the first one to use it, but it's very common, and it's a good trick to keep around. Another thing that's really interesting and worth mentioning about maintaining a fire, and also if you're constructing your own offset smoker or using a commercial one, is to look at draft. Now, by draft, I mean that air is being pulled through the smoker towards the smokestack. Now, you can see if you have good draft, you know that the flames are kind of leaning in almost. They are here, and that's a good thing, because as you can see, I don't have any vent at the back of the smoker. I'm running with the doors wide open. Typically, I run it like that, mainly because if it's windy outside, this really helps maintain a steady temp. The wind doesn't blow into the firebox and affect the temps. But that's the way I run, and the flames should be leaning in towards the opening to the food chamber. That's a good sign. That's a really good sign of having draft, meaning the smokestack is pulling air through the smoker. That's what you want. If you don't have good draft, you're not going to get a clean burn. You can see it here already. We're just going to check the smokestack in a few minutes, but there's zero smoke here. There's no smoldering. This is a good indication of clean burn. And of course it is, because we have super dry wood and an infinite supply of oxygen. To check temps, I placed my fireboard right here so we can keep watching it. Climbing up towards, well, 80 now, but I'm aiming for 120 or 130 Celsius. So give it 5 or 10 minutes and we should be up and running. So when talking about draft, I mean what the air that's being pulled through the smokestack all the way through the smoker and out the smokestack, and that's really important. So if you're ever going to pay attention to any detail in building an offset smoker, it's the smokestack, because that literally is the engine in your smoker. So the length of it determines the airspeed that travels through it, like meters per second or feet per second. The diameter determines the total volume of air being displaced, or will actually move through the smoker at a certain interval in time. So both parameters are important. I did calculate this one, so I got it to where I wanted it, and I'm actually going to climb up a little ladder. I'm going to measure the airspeed. I'm going to show you the color, or actually the invisible smoke, because that's what you want. And that means, well, the smoke in the air is pulled through because hot air rises, and when you have a tube like that, which a smokestack effectively is a tube, air is going to rise up and create a very, very tiny, not vacuum, but almost kind of like under pressure, pulling the cold air through. And by specifying the exact diameter and length of the smokestack, you get a certain draft. A certain draft means a certain airflow over the glowing embers, or in this case the wood. So I regulate temp purely by adding a few more splits, or just leaving it so it burns down a bit if it's too hot. So it's really easy in that sense. I don't use vents to choke it at all. I want like free, full oxygen supply at all times, so I get as clean smoke as possible. So I'm gonna get up on this ladder. I got an anemometer, a wind meter, to measure the airspeed at the top of the smokestack. So real convenient and an easy way of checking. So instead of guessing, you really know. And since we're about 100 degrees Celsius now, so I'm gonna climb up here and I'll show you. All right, here we are, top of the smokestack, and as you can see, there's like invisible smoke. This is a good indication of a clean burn. So let's get this wind meter up here. .5 meters per second. So there's a good draft in this one. Excellent. That's what I calculated also, and I checked it a little over a year ago, but it's good to see that the numbers hold up. Now checking the temps again, we're at 120, which is like 250 Celsius roughly. And looking at the fire now, you can see not many splits burning in there, like 5 splits I would guesstimate. So there's plenty of energy, many BTUs in the wood, so that's a really good source of energy. So as you can see, this is a big smoker, but you don't need that much to maintain temps. And as you can also see, there's no smoldering at all, very clean burn, which is exactly what you want. So how often do I have to feed it? Well, actually now we're at 120, so I'm gonna add 2 splits exactly. And of course every smoker is different, but just gonna have to check and see yours. But now if I add 2 of them, I know from experience that temp's gonna go up between 8 and 10 degrees, so it's rather sensitive, I would say. Also, that goes to show that you don't need that much wood to keep a good fire burning. Just gonna move that one over. And this also tells you how basically expensive it is to maintain. We're gonna have to sit here and feed a log every 10 minutes, or can you walk away and leave it for 20 minutes? But typically an offset smoker, you can never leave more than 30 minutes ever. So it's a lot of work, but I enjoy it. It's like low effort, but still nice. And I'm adamant about keeping steady temps. So I put this in 2 or 3 minutes ago, and already we're up 6 degrees. So it's really fast, and that's good. Now, how many can you put in at one time? Not too many, to be honest. It all depends on the amount of energy contained in the burning fire versus the energy required to heat these up. So typically I add 2 and that's it, but again it all depends on size of smoker. If 2 is too much, you can add 1, or even better for smaller smokers, cut the wood in half so you have like this length fire. I mean logs or splits. That's really gonna help, because if you put these in and it chokes the fire and you're gonna get a smoldering burn, then that's gonna affect the flavor of the food. So you want as clean burn as possible. Now again, to avoid having to choke the fire, that's why I utilize this preheating scheme, where I put the splits up here, I put the splits up here, and keep them circulating all the time. So once they hit the actual fire, they're gonna be pretty pre-warmed up and ready to go. So that means I can maintain temps very, very steadily. Gonna add another one right here. All right, so we're running at 116 Celsius now, which is nice even temp. So as you can see, there's not much fuel, to be honest, to keep this big smoker up to temp. So what happens if we add a big old log instead? Now this one is going to draw a lot of energy from the fire, basically meaning it's going to take, the temp cover is going to go down. It's going to take like 10 minutes before this one actually provides enough heat. So that could be a good thing or bad. If you're running a bit high, you can drop this one in and it's going to bring temps down for at least 10 minutes before the fire is catching on again. But then when it's catching on, this is going to burn for quite some time. So it doesn't have to be all bad, but I'm going to drop it in so you can see. And I haven't pre-warmed it either, so that of course is going to affect things. So already we're down to 113 on the temp. I'm going to report back in a few minutes and we'll see where we are at. So you can see already by the color of the smoke coming out that already temp dropped. So again, the color of the smoke is really a good key to tell you if you have a clean burn or not. But it's a small fire, it's a big log, so it's going to take quite a few minutes for this one to catch on. And we're down 3 or 4 degrees already, so we'll wait a few minutes and see. If we do a close-up, you can see here the smoke coming out. That's actually water vapor, because the log is quite thick, so it's going to take some time warming it up. And remember, we didn't have that smoke and vapor coming out before. So doing this, playing with fire, literally, is the way to learn. It's a really good learning experience. You get to see by playing with different size splits and logs how much temp is affected, how long you can run on each split, how much temp affects temp. If you drop in a big old log, it all depends again on the size of the smoker, how much draft you have through it, etc, etc. So each smoker is different. That's why I always recommend doing dry runs. And I mean, spending a few hours out here doing this, having a beer, I mean, I could think of worse things to do. So this is real nice. It's starting to get warmed up, but it's not warmed up enough, so it's not really contributing yet to the fire. And also when picking the splits or logs, you can feel them by the weight in your hand. It's not a precision instrument at all, but it tells you whether it's moist or dry. Now I know these are dry because I kept them on the roof for 2 years, so this is good, but that can also be of help, knowing that if you're overshooting on temp, drop in a slightly more moist log. That's going to bring it down for at least 20 minutes for you. I keep talking quite a bit about clean burn, and that's super important to me, especially when running an offset smoker, but the same doesn't quite apply to a kettle grill, because there you have a smoldering fire, very little oxygen supply, so it's never going to get that perfect clean burn. You're going to have a slightly smoldering fire, what I call a dirty smoke, just a bit of dirty smoke. The nice thing is that adds a ton of flavor, but at the same time you only need like 2 or 3 wood chunks to create the same flavor profile. So there's quite a big difference between running with oak wood, burning very cleanly for 10 hours versus using wood chunks for like 2 hours in a kettle. Since the smoke in the kettle is what I call dirty, just a bit, within valid limitations I would say, then it's still good. And that's the way I roll in a kettle and everybody else, but that's the main difference. So here you get a much cleaner burn, but over a longer time, so that's why the smoke flavor still applies and provides that really good tasty meat. So that was how I cook on my offset smoker, with a few tips and tricks. Hopefully that explains things and could help you get like better cooks with your offset smoker. Now remember, go out and experiment, try different sizes of splits versus logs, shorten them if you have to. If you have a smaller smoker, measure the airspeed going through the draft, because that tells you whether you have a clean burning fire, as well as looking at the color of the smoke, really important.